everyone, welcome back to another video, and for this video I'm going to be talking about Kennywood's old looping coaster, Steel Phantom, that is now standing as Phantom's Revenge nowadays. And I definitely do think that Phantom's Revenge is the better one of the two, given that I prefer airtime to inversions, but back before it became Phantom's Revenge, it was definitely one of the most unique aero loopers out there. The layout of this one is vastly different when you compare it to other aero loopers out there, given that pretty much all of them start with a drop and then you either go into inversion or a set of inversions, depending on which one you ride. This one you just go into a drop, go into a hill, and then you go into another drop that happens to be bigger than the first one. I mean, that was a very interesting feature for an aero looper. And given that Kennywood didn't have the most amount of space to work with when building this coaster, it's a very impressive feature if you ask me. And they were able to utilize the terrain and the ravine to their advantage to build the second drop. Now, back then when people often thought about Kennywood, they usually thought about coasters like Thunderbolt, Jackrabbit, and Racer, as Kennywood was really famous for their wooden roller coasters. So for them to have a large-scale steel coaster in the park, it was definitely a very interesting option. But then again, it would bring in a lot of people regarding from GP to enthusiasts for its heightened speed. And when they went with Aero to be the builder of this coaster, given that they had just wrapped up their biggest project up to this point, and it's still one of their headlining coasters today, Magnum XL200 at Cedar Point, which was opened up a year before. Steel Phantom will be the first full-circuit hypercoaster to feature inversions. If you take a look at the stats here, the lift hill is only 160 feet, but the second drop exceeded 200 feet, which qualified it as a hypercoaster. Now once you reach the top of the lift hill, the riders would then plunge down this right-handed drop, which reached speeds of approximately 65 miles an hour. Then you went up to this big hill, turned to your right a little bit more, and then that's when you plunged into this 220-foot drop, plunging to the ravine, reaching speeds of approximately 80 miles an hour on this coaster. Then you will make this left-hand turn, go up, and then you go into your first inversion, which was a vertical loop. Then immediately following that loop, you would go into a batwing. Once exiting the batwing, you would go through your final inversion, which arced over the brake run, which is a corkscrew. Following the corkscrew, riders would then go through one more large turn before entering the brakes. Now, the general consensus of this coaster is that while riders absolutely just loved the first portion of this coaster from the first and second drop, people really weren't fond of the inversions, given that you hit them at really high speed. Is that while they were very thrilling, they could have been very discomforting and caused a lot of head banging. I mean, you can just take a look at some of this footage coming up and just how fast these trains are hitting these inversions. It's like, God. I imagine that the vertical loop was very forceful, even after the trims were added, just because it really didn't impact the ride speed too much. Steel Phantom will remain operating for the next 10 years, and then once 2000 came around, Kennywood announced that Steel Phantom would be closing, in which Kennywood at first was met with a lot of backlash, given that people were going under the assumption that it was going to be completely dismantled and done away with. But what Kennywood had in mind instead of completely dismantling it, they had the manufacturer Morgan, or DH Morgan to be specific. They came in and instead of dismantling Steel Phantom, they ended up renovating it, in which they changed a portion of the layout. The first portion of the layout remained the same, the two drops, but the portion of the layout that was renovated is that all the inversions were removed and then replaced with a series of ejector airtime hill moments. With the renovation of Steel Phantom into what it is nowadays, Phantom's Revenge, the well-being of this coaster was not only rejuvenated, but the opinion of this coaster around the coaster community skyrocketed, to say the least, no pun intended. And while there were certainly a group of people that really liked this coaster as Steel Phantom, it went from being a very controversial coaster to being regarded as one of the best steel coasters on the planet. And while there were some people that were perfectly fine with it as Steel Phantom, the general consensus of this renovation is that it was definitely much needed on Kennywood's behalf. Now, as you see here, the first portion of the layout remained the exact same as it was when it was Steel Phantom. Now, the renovation comes in is that after this hard turn right here, riders then just went through this large-scale turnaround, went through a head chopper, or a second one should I say, with Thunderbolt structure, and then he went to the ride's finale, which was a series of bunny ejector airtime hills, which looked like a lot of fun. May I add, the coaster also got new trains. Instead of them being like the traditional aero looper trains with your traditional over-the-shoulder restraints, It now just has a seatbelt and lap bar. Now from a hypercoaster perspective, I feel like Phantom's Revenge has a better sensation of speed and pacing than Steel Phantom did, mainly because Steel Phantom had those trims and those inversions which they really had to slow the ride down a bit for. I mean, even though the trims didn't really do much, it doesn't have the speed that Phantom's Revenge does, for the pacing I mean. And regardless of how good Steel Phantom may have been, I feel like this was definitely a step in the right direction on Kennywood's behalf, and now with Steel Curtain coming into the picture next year, this is just going to make Kennywood that much bigger of a bucket list park for me, and hopefully if I'm lucky I can ride it next year. And if Steel Curtain pans out very well, then Kennywood's going to have a pretty good set of coasters on their hands. And if Steel Curtain manages to beat out Phantom's Revenge for best at Kennywood, even if it's not the best at its park anymore, Phantom's Revenge will always be one of the park's biggest icons for a long time to come. Anyways, that about does it for this video. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And I'll see you guys in my next video, whenever that is. But until then, ride on.